morning, everyone.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone.
Welcome to my Pollen Talk. First, I want to give you some context before talking about some actual pieces of legislation and finally giving some recommendations. Without further ado, I want to take you to an iron ore mine in Brazil. 3 years ago, at the Brumadinho iron mine in Brazil, a dam collapsed, releasing 12 million cubic meters of toxic mud and causing 272 deaths. The dam was certified by a Brazilian subsidiary of the German TÜV Süd, and also the owner of this iron mine is a supplier for major European corporations like ThyssenKrupp and ArcelorMittal. This is why this disaster could have been probably prevented if a proper due diligence legislation would have been in place at the time. If we look at this graph, we can see that the EU is supplied with these 6 ores listed here, mainly from the global south, with exceptions for the US, Canada, and Russia. So the Brazilian example is not a singular case, but it spreads over different countries as well. If we go back to the Brazilian example, what is actually good due diligence legislation? If we take a look at the German Due Diligence Supply Chain Act passed last year, we can see here in the middle the supply chain all the way from the mine to the end product. This system is based on a reporting and monitoring system, whereas each individual step in the supply chain has to report to the next entity, and leading to the final report by the German company to the supervising authority. This authority can investigate and sanction the German company if it fails to comply to this system. But this act has 4 fundamental flaws. First, it only applies to companies with more than 1,000 employees. Second, there's only a direct liability for the direct supplier and no real liability further down the supply chain, where most of the instances happen. And thirdly, affected people have no access to German courts, and there's no civil liability mechanism in the German Act. And fourthly, in regards to environmental protection, it's only limited to these 3 conventions on mercury, persistent organic polluters, and exporting hazardous waste. If we now look at the Commission's proposal introduced this Wednesday, we can see it is a considerably step up. Especially it adds environmental risks like harm to ecological integrity and harm to biodiversity. It also introduces a civil liability regime, and then it applies to companies with 500 plus employees and in high impact sectors like mining for 250 plus employees. It also incorporates the 1.5 degree target, even though be it in a non-penalized way. So it's more of a guideline. But this proposal also has 2 flaws. It doesn't include all sectors. For instance, transport and energy are excluded. And especially energy is heavily reliant also on coal imports, which face similar issues than the iron ore mining process. And then it only applies to established business relationships. So there might be a loophole that companies might not be liable if they change their suppliers every so often. Coming to the recommendations, I urge the Commission to stay on this and to really seize this unique opportunity to export our standards into the world with a proper due diligence legislation. And such legislation should incorporate a broad rules on environmental protection and also incorporating the 1.5 degree target in a binding way, not only in a non-binding guidance way. Then it should give affected people direct access to courts in the EU. Here, the use of tort law would be, in my view, especially effective, and it adds the added benefit that it is present in all member states. So there are no implementation costs really for the member states. Then small and medium-sized enterprises should rightfully be excluded because they might be overburdened by this legislation, which could lead to relocation of companies and also to job loss, and this might be in the end a blow to the EU competitiveness. Then finally, the loopholes should be closed. So every sector should be included, and the whole supply chain should be included. So there should be no difference between direct and indirect suppliers. It should go back all the way. And finally, for coherence's sake, it should be aligned with the European Green Deal and also with the UN 2030 agenda on SDGs, as well as underpinned by intensified development cooperation, so that the EU's impact on the Global South could effectively be mitigated.